We have a bombshell report by Elliotte Friedman on some of the issues going on within the Islanders organization that led to them moving on from Hall of Fame GM and President Lou Lamoriello. We're going to be discussing that on this episode of Islanders Digest and also talking about some of the candidates that Elliotte Friedman named as the potential next GM of the New York Islanders. A lot of exciting stuff. Before we get into that, be sure to subscribe to this channel. We are now halfway towards our goal of hitting 100 subscribers. So if you already subscribed to the channel, thank you so much for all your support. It means a lot. And if you haven't already and you're an Islander fan, what are you waiting for? Now let's get right into this report on the 32 Thoughts podcast, which I highly recommend you listen to. You get a lot of insight, both about the Islanders and every single team. I mean, he talks about every single team. Elliotte Friedman's podcast, it is incredible. And one of the main focuses of the podcast this week was obviously the Islanders, especially after moving on from Lou Lamoriello. And Friedman revealed that they actually almost fired Lamoriello in December. There were a lot of issues between Lou Lamoriello and Collins, who is now going to be choosing the next GM for the New York Islanders. And this is definitely interesting for Islander fans. It kind of gives an insight to what was going on, and it really seems like Lou Lamoriello was stuck on his old ways. He's also had some issues with Patrick Roy on the playing style of the New York Islanders. Doesn't matter for Patrick Roy now. Lou Lamoriello is no longer in the picture, and the real question is whether or not the new GM will give Patrick Roy another chance. And that really probably depends on not only on whether or not the new GM wants a fresh start, but also on if they have a similar philosophy to Patrick Roy on how they think the Islanders should play. There's a lot of talk that Patrick Roy really wanted the Islanders to play an open game, or he didn't mind them playing an open game, while Lou Lamoriello was very focused on the details. As for his disagreement with Collins, it seemed like there was a big focus, according to the podcast, with Collins on business. And a lot of the things that Lou Lamoriello likes from his players are not really great for marketing a team. You know, you don't really get to know the Islanders as well as you get to know players on other teams because they're not really as allowed to join podcasts and things like that. And this definitely affects marketing, and this is definitely going to be something they're going to want to look at with the next GM. Now, something else that was talked about in this podcast that was taken out of context. At first, I saw this tweet and I was like, whoa, Matt Martin, Thomas Hickey as potential names for the next GM. That would be an insane and frankly terrible decision. No, that is not what this is saying. If you actually listen to the full podcast, he did say, Elliotte Friedman, I also wonder, too, if they're going to want an Islander in there, like Matt Martin or Thomas Hickey, someone who bleeds the Islanders blue. For the record, that was more talking about maybe a new GM will bring in a former Islander to really have an Islanders presence. It wasn't saying that they would be the next Islanders GM, but perhaps they'd be taken in a management role to be the GM in the future, which I definitely would not be opposed to. I like Matt Martin, I like Thomas Hickey, and I think it would be good to have their voices heard, especially if the Islanders are going in a new direction. Someone who is not familiar with the Islanders, someone like Matt Martin or Thomas Hickey can definitely make sure there is an Islanders voice in that room so that this team doesn't become something that's completely foreign to the fans. Next thing I want to talk about is some of the potential names that Elliotte Friedman talked about as the potential next GM for the New York Islanders. As we said, they were talking about potentially having Matt Martin or Thomas Hickey be in a role in that front office. They're not going to be the GM, so the question is who is. And one thing we do have to talk about really quickly is Elliotte Friedman clarified after talking to the Islanders organization, talking to Matt Collins, it does seem like the Islanders are really open to anything here. They're not just looking for a GM, although in their tweet it kind of said they were looking for a GM. They said they also would be open to making two hirings, a GM and a president, depending on who they think is the right fit for the job. And that's really important when it comes to Darren Dreger. Darren Dreger was speculating that now that John Collins is now making a list of players, of people to interview for this position. He mentioned that Ken Holland might be involved. And yesterday when I saw this name with this tweet, I was alarmed. I don't think Ken Holland would be a good GM for the New York Islanders. He just has a lot of philosophies that are similar to Lou Lamoriello, and it just does not fit what this team needs. I definitely think this team needs a younger voice. But Elliotte Friedman mentioned on his podcast that he doesn't believe that Ken Holland would want to be a GM at this point in his career. If he does get the job, it would be as president, and then he would either agree on a GM with John Collins, or there would be a GM hired in addition to Ken Holland. And I definitely think this would be a little more acceptable. I would still be concerned about bringing in Ken Holland. Just worried that he wouldn't allow a newer to GM to really do what they want to do. But If Islanders ownership thinks something like that could work, I would not be opposed to it, especially with the entire Bridgeport system really needs to be overhauled. A president of hockey operations could really help with that, especially one like Ken Holland, who has done it before, because realistically, Bridgeport needs to be torn down and built from the ground up. The systems they have there are not working. I mean, the team winning 4 home games all season is absolutely abysmal. And that is something that is going to need to happen. And it's actually something that apparently, according to Elliotte Friedman, is very appealing to people who want this job. At first, it sounded like something that would take a lot of work, but these GMs really like this opportunity to really build something from the foundation. So that is encouraging. Another name that was mentioned in addition to Ken Holland was Mark Bergevin. That is another name, and that would likely be a name that would also be the GM. That is a name I do have some reservations from. He did leave Montreal in a very good place, as Friedman did mention, but there were a lot of issues there. But at the same time, perhaps this is a situation where just because a GM failed the first time doesn't mean they can't learn to have a better run in the future. Still, I would probably prefer the Islanders hire a new name, a younger executive that has more of a focus on analytics, and also a modern NHL that requires a lot of drafting and also a lot of focusing on the salary cap, which is a more and more difficult obstacle to overcome. That's really what I want them to focus on. Again, if they do hire an older figure like Ken Holland to be a president, and then they bring in a younger GM, or a GM that has a younger way of thinking, they don't necessarily have to be young, but a more modern way of looking at the NHL, I think that would be ideal for the Islanders. Again, I would rather just have a younger GM, but if there is a Ken Holland or Mark Bergevin who wants to be the president of hockey operations for the Islanders, and they pitch a good idea to John Collins, I think that could work. Now, we do have some other news we do want to touch up on for the New York Islanders. First of all, apparently the change is not only going to be with Lou Lamoriello. In addition, the Islanders are also making a change on the broadcast. Longtime radio voices Chris King and Greg Picker are let go. So, as Arthur Staple reports here, we might not have an Islanders radio broadcast next season, which would be a complete disaster and actually would go against a lot of what we heard about the issues with Lou Lamoriello not being great for this team, like getting fans and kind of building up the market. Getting rid of your radio host is not what you want to do there. I mean, it's first of all, it's unprofessional for a team not to have a radio broadcast, but on top of that, so many fans listen to games on the radio. It would not be good for fans for you to move on from having a radio team. Now, maybe the idea here is to get to a new radio system. We don't know what's going to happen here. Again, it is just speculation when we're saying the team might not have a radio broadcast just because they don't have anyone to be on the broadcast at this moment. Perhaps this is just more of a part of an overhaul to make a different broadcast, but still, it's going to be a shame that Kinger and Greg are no longer there. I typically watch the Islanders games, but I have listened to a few, and they do bring a lot of energy, and they're just so passionate about the Islanders. So it's disappointing to see them going in another direction. Hopefully they go in another direction and don't just get rid of their broadcast team for the radio. I mean, we don't know. Who knows? After last season where there was one game that wasn't even televised, who knows with the Islanders. But if the idea of getting rid of Lou Lamoriello was kind of to make this team get better at reaching out to fans, this is certainly not the first step towards doing that. So we will see what happens there. And finally, Cal Clutterbuck has officially announced his retirement from the NHL on his Instagram. It was pretty clear after he served last season as an analyst for the New York Islanders that Cal Clutterbuck's career was over, but he never officially announced it until now. Nice to see him announce it in a way that's not leaked by anyone, and he can just say goodbye to the game the way he wants to say goodbye to the game. And for this, honestly, one takeaway you can take from this is, as Elliotte Friedman said, perhaps the new GM looks for someone to be involved with the front office. Cal Clutterbuck did do broadcasting this season, but perhaps he is a former player, who could serve on a new front office as a voice of an Islander. I mean, Matt Martin, Cal Clutterbuck, Thomas Hickey, they are all great examples there of players who really understand what it means to be an Islander. And in this new front office, I really think that could be a good idea to have a voice like that. That being said, let me know what you think about all these changes. Who do you think should be the next GM of the New York Islanders? And do you think it'd be a good idea to have a player like Matt Martin or Cal Clutterbuck in that front office to really provide a voice of what the Islanders are all about? I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments below. If you have not already, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Again, be one of our first 100 subscribers. My name is Patrick Nilan. This is Islanders Digest. Let's go Islanders.